To Abby Phillip. I mean, remarkably, President Donald Trump could become the first president ever to be impeached by the House and then seek another term at the next election. Clearly, those Democratic candidates tonight hoping to avoid that. But how will this impeachment inquiry play into the race for these Democratic contenders in 2020?
That's right, Becky. It's going to be an unusual situation here at Otterbein, where you have candidates who are both calling for President Trump to be impeached and also saying that they want to face up against him in 2020. On this very stage right behind me, they're all going to be lined up here, all 12 candidates on the largest debate stage in U.S. history. And right in the middle is going to be Joe Biden and Elizabeth Warren. Bernie Sanders is going to be just over on this side here. But the idea here is that you now have at the center of the impeachment attention Joe Biden, the former vice president, answering those questions about his son Hunter Biden. But he's also fighting for that top spot that he's had for much of this Democratic primary. It's been Elizabeth Warren who has been rising steadily in the polls over the last several days, including recently in a Quinnipiac poll that put her at 30%, just a few notches above Joe Biden. So on this debate stage tonight, you're going to have these top-tier candidates, Biden, Warren, and Sanders, really duking it out to stay where they are, stay at the top of the pack. And then as you look to the far ends of this stage, a lot of these candidates are just fighting to stay in the race, many of them polling in the single digits, many of them just trying to capture people's attention and get into some of these conversations. I think what you're going to see tonight, Becky, is a lot of these candidates really starting to go after each other one-on-one. It might be one of the more pointed debates that we've seen so far, because the stakes are very high and the going is going to get tougher as we go into November and December, closer to these primary and caucus contests.
Isn't it just? Abby, always a pleasure. Thank you for that inside the action for you there. And do be sure to tune in for that CNN New York Times Democratic presidential debate. 12 candidates, as Abby says, will take the stage tonight at 8 p.m. in New York City. That is 4 a.m. Wednesday here in Abu Dhabi, for those of you who don't sleep, and 8 a.m. in Hong Kong. Right. Well, thank you to all of our reporters. A week is a long time in geopolitics, isn't it? Well, last week, President Trump announced he was pulling American troops back from northern Syria. Well, that effectively gave Turkey the green light to take on Syrian Kurds, a key U.S. ally, of course, in the fight against ISIS. Well, now, Washington calling for a ceasefire in the area, with Vice President Mike Pence set to head to Turkey soon to try to negotiate that. Overnight, the Trump administration also saying it's imposing sanctions on Ankara aimed at stopping the Turkish assault on Kurdish forces. Meanwhile, President Trump tweeted this, saying that Syria and President Bashar al-Assad should protect the Kurds and fight Turkey for their own land. We have reporters on the ground in the region. Nick Pope-Molsh is in Erbil in Iraq. Our Damon on the Turkish-Syrian border, and Jeremy Diamond staying with us from the White House. And stand by, Jeremy. I want to get to our guys on the ground there first. And to you, Awa. We've heard talk that President Trump believes that people on the ground should be sorting this out themselves. Some sanctions light, a lot of people say, and a potential visit by the Vice President to Turkey. How's this all going down where you are?
Pretty well, actually, Becky, if you look at it, because President Trump had promised to destroy Turkey economically, but this round of sanctions barely even caused the lira to hiccup. And Turkey, President Erdogan himself saying that no matter what, this operation is going to be going forward. And as for Vice President Pence's visit, we're still waiting on specifics on that, but it's going to be interesting to see what sort of leverage the U.S. seems to think it can bring or it can use, given that by withdrawing, it effectively pulled itself out of and off of any sort of negotiating table inside Syria and handed that over fully to the Russians. And that's really what we're seeing unfolding in the Syrian battlefield. Russia is stepping in to act as mediator between the Syrian government army, the army of President Bashar al-Assad, as well as the Turks and the Arab Syrian forces that they have allied themselves with. You know, Russia has emerged from all of this both as the playmaker and as the kingmaker, and the U.S. has effectively, stunningly, one must say, sidelined itself.
Sidelined itself. Let's back up and listen to her statement one more time to be sure that we understand the origin of what she just said. Please listen.
Nick!
Back up. Stop right there.
Forces that they have allied themselves with. You know, Russia has emerged from all of this both as the playmaker and as the kingmaker, and the U.S. has effectively, stunningly, one must say, sidelined itself.
Stuntedly. Sidelined itself. I want to stop right there for a second to elaborate in just exactly what is going on here. What we're dealing with is a group of individuals who has no intent towards abiding by the Holy Bible in regard to the variety and vast majority of the people over in the Middle East. Whenever it comes to seeing biblical Bible prophecy fulfill itself in regard of seeing a revival manifested through the teachings of Jesus Christ of Nazareth out of the King James Version Bible or some of the other new translated Bibles, they have absolutely no desire whatsoever in caring about those fulfillments. The only thing that they care about is what is in it for me. I. And of course, whenever you have all these different groups that has their own ideology towards how and why they're going to get what they're going to get, it basically turns into a free-for-all. You have different tribal groups that have been fighting other tribal groups, I guess, for thousands of years because of some misguided, misunderstood happening that occurred maybe 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 or 4,000 years ago. So this is a recipe for catastrophe. This is a recipe or a formula towards seeing the final major battle into the Third World War or Armageddon. And you may be asking yourself, well, Juby, you've been preaching peace now for 30 years through the admiration of the Windmill Ministries missions. You're right. I have been. But keep in mind, I didn't get no supporters. I didn't get no congregation. I never got an established, sound church to support the ideology that come from the Windmill Ministries missions here at 291 Thompson Road. And because things did not occur the way that they should have occurred pertaining to the church sector or the church society beginning right here in West Tennessee, now we are going to the next chapter towards seeing what we're going to see unfold right over there in the Middle East. what Mr. Donald Trump has done, regardless whether it was intentionally or not intentionally, has started a calamity. Let's just use this terminology. He has started a forest fire that is going to be the next thing to impossible or very difficult to put out. And because there's so many hurting, aching, hungry, defiant people over there, you are fixing to see something on international TV like you would not believe that is going to occur. And I just hope to God that they got enough sense not to start bombing each other with nuclear bombs. But the fault falls upon the feet of those who did not properly do their effective job here in the United States. Not just recently, just within the past 7, 8, 9, 10 days. But the fault falls upon the feet of those in the church communities that did not take this message serious. Just the other day, I was up in Union City getting some parts at the parts store. And I spoke to an individual up there that knew all about my background. And another individual come in there that I went to school with that once more knew about my background towards who I am and what kind of raising that I had over here in this part of the neck of the woods. Two completely different, opposite perspectives. One, the individual that I went to school with said, I know Juby, and I know that Juby is not that way. And for them to have brought up all these lies and all these innuendos is very unfair to him. The other person working in behind the counter that was the manager of this particular parts store, in which I'm not going to use his name or his identity pertaining to the name of the parts store, was going after me at first before this individual come through the door, that you're this and you're that, and I've read this about you, and I've seen this about you, and I know this about you. Man, he was going to wear me out pertaining to the things that he thought that he knew about me. Until the individual walked in the door that I sat in classroom day after day after day towards reading, studying, doing PE together, doing library together, doing other things together that really actually knew me. So the bottom line is that these people around in this area didn't want peace. If they truly wanted peace, they wouldn't have lived the lifestyle that they lived, pertaining to all the ungodliness and all the sinful immorality acts that they have been committing upon each other, all the divorces that is now led into massive shootings here in America, etc., 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 towards us being $23 trillion plus dollars in debt and 2.3 million incarcerated prisoners here in America. One of the most highest incarcerated countries in the world is right here in America because of their illegitimacy policies that they practice on a day-to-day level. And I can just use just the example of the experiences that I've recently went through for the past 4.5 years since I've been back here in Weakley County to validate just exactly what kind of people that I'm dealing with. And plus the people up in Kentucky, and plus some of the people out in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, that wasn't aware of who that I was at the time whenever they decided that they was going to throw a punch at me. As well as other law enforcement agencies throughout this countryside, some of them as far south as Atlanta, Georgia. This is all fixing to unfold according to biblical Bible prophecy. And until we see a major spiritual development pertaining to a revival, that yes, is supposed to escalate out of the Windmill Ministries missions. You keep in mind, I did not personally anoint this calling that I have in my life. I did not anoint the calling towards the development of a ministry. These was all done by the hand of God. And we still have people in this area that are still wanting to fight God himself and the calling of God. And until we see that change, these things that you're seeing on TV are only going to escalate and grow worser and worser and worser. And basically what Donald Trump has done, he has exacerbated the problem. Similar towards some of the things that he's done on the southern border that I hate to make mention of in that way, but whenever you draw that much of attention to the southern wall, you're going to stir up ideals in people's minds that ordinarily never would have dreamed about, well, let's go to America. They're supposed to be building a wall down there, and let's go to America before they get it built. Let's watch some more of this pertaining to war correspondence in this area that, like I said, is only going to intensify. Let's watch.
Nick, you were on the ground during the worst of this chaos, as it were, over the past, 72 hours. You're on the other side of the border now as Washington calls for a ceasefire in the area. Realistic?
Well, the problem, I think, is no, that's a far reach simply because of the lack of trust between all the people who are asking to stop their current activity with. The Syrian Kurds, they've just betrayed, quite startlingly, so they won't be really listening for American advice at this point. Very suspicious of them, and they've already gone over really to the Syrian regime side for assistance, with Russia as their backer. The Turkish, as you heard from Mara there, just moving ahead with this, frankly, and hearing the threat of economic obliteration as actually turning up as sanctions against the defense minister and Ministry of Energy as well. So it's quite extraordinary, frankly, how we're still at this point where the Trump administration seem unable to grasp a policy on this that actually deters people from action, while their troops on the ground appear to be making a precipitous withdrawal. Now, we know that they've left from the west of the Euphrates River out of the town called Manbij. The spokesperson for forces here said that they've begun their withdrawal, which would clearly suggest that it's quite a way already advanced if they're actually consolidating on particular bases. But the key question for those on the ground is what comes now of Syrian regime forces. They are very close to the Kurds in a bit of a land grab, frankly, in terms of trying to shore up Syrian Kurdish positions. And we've also heard from the Russian Defense Ministry that it's Russian military police who are in that area around Manbij, where Turkish-backed forces and Syrian Kurdish and Syrian regime forces risk touching each other, risk coming into contact. It's Russian police who are doing the kind of, not mediating, but making sure that there's deconfliction. So the United States out of the picture here simply because of the phone call between Donald Trump and President Erdogan on Sunday. That has caused us to come to this moment, and it has left a quite remarkable sea change on the ground to occur in literally a matter of 48, 72 hours. Becky?
I want to say something else since he got through saying that. In 1988, when 9 tapes wound up going to the White House, it was a good thing that Ronald Reagan stood up to the atrocities that was going on over in Russia and calling out Russia towards it being a evil society in the way that it was dictating to its people over there. Ronald Reagan, in diplomacy values, was basing his understanding towards how Russia was treating its people was similar towards how the Pharaohs was treating the children of Israel going back about 4,000 years ago in this type of dictated tyranny type atmosphere that is in fact a evil demonic government force that people, by and large, don't want to have to be under. The children of Israel felt like that they was under bondage simply because they was being ruled and dictated to by a evil demonic dictator pertaining to the pharaohs. And you can go back throughout history and look throughout other countries and other kings that has done similar or worser things, even worser than the pharaohs. So whenever Ronald Reagan stood up against the evil empire pertaining to the old Yugoslavia, the old USSR, he was being mandated by God of doing so. The holy righteous God, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, the God of the Lord Jesus Christ. Once more, the falling of the Berlin Wall was in fact a good thing in tearing down that ideology, that old concept, to the point that we should and can and are going to enslave our people with this type of bondage, to the point that they do not have the right to think for themselves, they do not have the right to act upon to themselves, they do not have the right to start their own businesses for themselves, they do not have the right to have children and bear fruitful families for themselves, and on and on and on. The only problem was that was put over to the side and placed up onto a shelf way down on the bottom of the priority list, and the politicians of the American government took it upon themselves towards doing what that they have done in the past 30 plus years. I want people to listen to me very carefully in what I'm saying, because what I'm saying is in fact factual, and it can be proven. It's truthful. All of a sudden, through the latter part of Ronald Reagan's administration, going into the Bush administration, we was going to become a cooler for the Middle East, a advocate of being a middle ground person towards what we seen was right and what we seen was wrong, towards basically interfering with other people's affairs. And we was going to do this under the pretense towards trying to bring stability to the Middle East. Stability. It's kind of like walking outside of your apartment or walking outside a retail store, and all of a sudden you see two people arguing, and you intervene yourself in between the fight towards trying to stop the fight, thinking that this is the right thing to do. Well, let's break these people up. Let's stop this from escalating, from getting worse, because somebody's fixing to get hurt here. Some of your local nightclubs call these type of people coolers. They cool that particular situation down to the point that the two people in actuality don't never fight. But the thing about it is, the hatred, the emotions, the feelings never go away. And they boil, and they boil, and they fester just like a sore, that every time you tear the scab off of it, it gets a little worse. It gets a little worse. If things would have been handled properly in the eyes of the spiritual world pertaining to manifesting peace, we would have done already seen a great revival, not just here in America, but through other parts of the nation and other parts of the planet, throughout the healing of the nations, to the point that we would all be living right now in peace and utopia and prosperity. But the Americans didn't want that. The locals didn't want that around here. They was determined that they was going to isolate my message because they didn't like either the messenger, which is myself that's speaking right now, or they simply didn't like the message. Or they thought that I was trying to hustle them, manipulate them. They thought that I was doing this for money, or that I was doing this for self-appointed fame, in which it has been neither. Because I could care less about the money, and I could care less about the fame. A matter of fact, the type of fame that I have gotten recently, just since I have moved back here to Tennessee, has been excruciating to say the least. And to be quite frank with you, it has actually been tormentive. It's been tormentive in people, instead of them respecting the position that God has given me, they are still gnawing and pawing and lapping and sniggering and disrespecting the position that God has given me. You know, I understand the scriptures whenever it says that a true prophet is without honor among his own home and among his own people. But I didn't realize that by being dishonored meant that I was going to have to idly stand by and be attacked brutally again and again and again, towards being tormented, terrorized by a society of people that now I'm living around, and the court systems, the judicial system in this area basically sat idly by and let it occur again and again and again. So whatever befallens upon to this situation that's happening right now over in the Middle East is that in which what has been fumigated, that in which what has been manifested through a manifesto of their own doings towards not wanting to support the Windmill Ministries missions, and now it is escalating into this beginning phases of what we're seeing right now. Once more, these hypocrites around here that want to preach the message, do as I say, but not as I do, has escalated into these occurrences that are happening right now, that are unfortunately going to get worse and worse, and yes, worse. It grieves my heart, it saddens my heart as well as God's heart, because it talks about these being the sorrows that are going to be fallen upon to mankind in these last days. But in actuality, what the American government done by being a cooler only prolonged the situation that made it fester and fester and fester into what we're fixing to see now, to where this lukewarm status, this lukewarm toxic environment has not only escalated to massive shootings and us being $23 trillion and 2.3 million incarcerated prisoners here in America, but now we're fixing to see what this lukewarm status in actuality is going to be occurring over in the Middle East. I pray for the victims, and it doesn't matter if it's the victims of the Americans, the victims of the Russians, the victims of the Chinese, the victims of China, the victims of the people over in India, the victims over the people in Africa, the victims of the people over in the Middle East. I pray for the victims of those that are going to have to go through such harsh environmental climate changes that are not just made by natural occurrences, but are made by unnatural occurrences pertaining to man. It talks about, in the Bible, this battle of the river of Euphrates, that the blood will be as deep as a horse's bridle. These things are all lining up. And Donald Trump can scream and holler, and he can send all his ambassadors that he wants. But this thing now is on a course of its own, in which hastily saying, not wanting these occurrences to happen, but hastily saying that this is what has been created because of an American government that wanted to intervene in God's divine will towards what should have occurred 30 years ago that did not occur, and because it didn't occur, now it is going over into Plan B. Plan B is going to be much, much uglier than what Plan A ever thought about becoming. This will affect economies all over the world towards what is fixing to unfold and escalate. Like I said, it's as if a match has been lit into a crispy, dry, emberly forest, and now we are fixing to see the fire escalate to the point that I really don't think talks is going to be fruitful at this particular point in time, because these governments that are moving in this type of iron curtain, this type of artillery, they're not going in there to play. They're going in there to reap the rewards of the fruits towards what that they feel like that they can achieve through an iron fist, through aggression, through the means of, yes, war. I prayed for a revival for many, many days, fasting and praying up in Land Between the Lakes. And I was attacked by Dwayne Camry, the captain of Land Between the Lakes up in Kentucky. I was attacked by him and his associates that he was ruling over, and Gary Hawkins and Lisa Hawkins and those law enforcement people up there in that area, that their veins spread out into Paducah, Kentucky, Benton, Kentucky, Mayfield, Kentucky, Calvert City, Kentucky, Grand Rivers, Kentucky. I could name town after town after town after town towards how that their tentacles spread out towards trying to destroy, once more, biblical Bible prophecy of it ever occurring or manifesting itself to the degree that God wanted it to manifest itself. Was I harmed during the time that I was being attacked? Why, yeah. I was taking on all kinds of wounds. Wounds of false accusations, wounds of being put incarcerated, towards being evaluated in various situations, wounds that will probably in actuality never be healed as far as a true absolute healing of the occurrence such that it never took place to begin with. But I allow for God to heal my soul, heal my spirit, heal my mind. That way, whenever I do bring up these things that has occurred in the past, that I bring them up in a teaching type setting or a teaching type example towards this is what actually occurred. And I can prove it on paper and in record. towards what has occurred here pertaining to the past. But what we're looking at right here, that you're now staring at the TV set, coming live out of CNN. Turkey military offense. This is not the past that you're looking at right here. This is now becoming the present as well as the future. Once more, what the government done, beginning in the phases of the Bushes, they was speaking out of both sides of their mouth. They claimed that they wanted peace, but at the same time, they was going to war. And this war has costed us now over $6 trillion. And God only knows that the arms, the legs, the eyes, the ears, and the lives that has been sacrificed on account of this mistake that has occurred. And even Donald Trump has acknowledged that there was a massive mistake that occurred during the recourse of the past 3 or 4 administrations. Now another mistake has been made towards pulling out a group of individuals. And I don't know if this mistake was done intentionally or not intentionally, but the fact of the matter is now it has already occurred. The damage has already been done. We have already set a sail towards what the future is going to be. And believe it or not, and I don't say this lightly, this may be the only way of straightening out the adversity, the anger, the bitterness, the hate, the evil that to this day is still festering its ugly head over in the Middle East. This very well may be the only way that eventually on down the road, 7, 8, 10, 12, 15 years from now, towards actually seeing peace to the Middle East. I don't know. I know it's become ugly, it's become raw, it's become heathenistic and barbaric, and these are only the beginning phases towards what I personally believe that we're fixing to see. Raw reality in regard of all these ethnic groups, tribal ethnic groups that are pulling forces together towards wanting to beat their chest and prove that they're the baddest person on the block. Let's listen to the rest of this, and if there's ever been a time that we needed to pray for each other, pray for our environment, pray that God's will be done. Since this travesty has already occurred in the past 30 plus years here in America, if there's ever been a time that we needed to pray for one another, I truly believe that it is today. Let's listen to the rest of this.
Jeremy's still with us at the White House. Thank you, Nick. U.S. House Republican Liz Cheney has linked both of what are our top stories. Here's what she told Fox News.
What the Democrats are doing themselves to try to weaken this president is part of this. It was not an accident that the Turks chose this moment to roll across the border, and I think the Democrats have got to pay very careful attention to the damage that they're doing with the impeachment proceedings.
Well, that is a bold claim, Jeremy.
It certainly is a bold claim, and frankly, it flies in the face of what most officials here, including Republicans, feel is in fact responsible for this sea change on the ground, and that is that the president of the United States essentially gave the green light to Turkey's President Erdogan to move forward with this invasion. When the White House press secretary announced that President Trump had spoken on the phone with Erdogan a little bit over a week ago, it said Turkey is moving forward with this offensive. It did not say that the United States condemns this move, does not want Turkey to move forward with this. It simply allowed it to happen. And now what we're seeing inside this administration is really an attempt to play catch up. Yesterday, the president announcing several sanctions on some key Turkish officials and previewing the possibility of some more. We didn't hear from the president himself, but who we did hear from was the vice president of the United States, who is calling for a ceasefire.
The United States of America wants Turkey to stop the invasion, to implement an immediate ceasefire, and to begin to negotiate with Kurdish forces in Syria to bring an end to the violence.
That is so hypocritical in knowing what you have just done, regardless whether it was intentionally or non-intentionally, but you was warned by CIA officials and Army military correspondents that this was not a proper move to make. And now, once more, the United States government, speaking out of both sides of its mouth at one time, white man speaketh with forked tongue, talks about one thing, but in reality is doing something completely, totally different. Once more, to my viewers, please do not let this type of toxic hypocrisy deter you from the truth towards what has occurred here. The Americans have made a harsh mistake. The church society, the so-called church society, not the true church society, but the so-called the so-called church society here in America has made a harsh mistake. And because it has made this harsh mistake, this is their quick way out. This is their easy avenue out, rather than have accountability issues with starting right here in Kenton, Tennessee, and the mental health department down in Bolivar, rather than them give full accountability towards not wanting to support the Windmill Ministries in its message. This is their easy way out. And rather than them to admit that they made a great error towards not getting in behind the messenger, which is now speaking to you in behind the camera, this, once more, is the American hypocrisy in its fullest that we're seeing unveiling itself right in front of our very eyes. And you wonder how come I went up into Land Between the Lakes and planted a curse up onto these heathenistic, barbaric, insensitive, cold, lukewarming, people that want to still walk around with a insignia on their plateau saying, I'm a born again Christian. Now you're seeing the reason why. When you're dealing with this type of ideology, not ideology, but ideology, I was forced to have to go up into the forest and plant a curse up onto these people. I don't know if it was drugs. I don't know if it was the culture that they come out of pertaining to the 60s, the live now and give an account later society pertaining to the hippie society in regard to the drugs, If it feels good, do it. Sex, drugs, and rock and roll. I don't know. It all stems from the work of Satan. I do know that. The reason why that I hit this barrier, this wall, almost like a standoff pertaining to good versus evil, evil versus good. And I felt like that the only thing that I could do at the time that I done it, in the year that I done it in, which would have been somewhere, give or take, around 10 years ago, was to plant a curse up in land between the lakes in regard to all this resistance and all this type of hideous wickedness that I was having to face off on here in America. It's sad. It's really, really sad that a group of people was similar to the Pharaohs that actually thought that they was going to be able to detour, undermine, and overcome the will of God and God's holy, precious anointing and his people here up onto this planet. It's really sad because it runs into basically the same type of scenario that happened during the Pharaohs whenever Moses was led of God to liberate his people out of that type of bondage that they was going through. It's really sad. It's almost like we're repeating history all over again in regard to this type of madness, this type of resistance, this type of ungodliness all over again. We're just doing it in a different format. We're doing it in a different time zone. We're doing it in a different setting. But whenever you look at it spiritually, it's the exact same type of resistance that occurred during the time that Moses was allotted by God. Let my people go. And the Pharaohs, which was a government, resisted and resisted and resisted and resisted until finally something had to break. And after it broke, then is whenever Moses got to lead his people and liberate his people out of that type of ungodliness that had occurred in their lives towards the bondage that God's people was under. And you can't tell me that all the stuff that I've went through just within the past 4.5 years since I've been back here at 291 Thompson Road, Sharon, Tennessee, zip code 38255, hasn't been a bondage that has befallen upon to not only my life, but fell upon to my brother's life that caused him a early premature death. In other words, he couldn't take it. He couldn't bear it, of the tension, the stress, the anxiety. And it basically drove him off into an early grave. And that's exactly what they would love to do right here in Weakley County, pertaining to the officials, the authorities, the ones that walks around with a badge on their chest, and the ones that's in control of the ones that's in control of the badge on their chest. They would love to see the individual that's talking to you right now be driven off into a early premature death. Not a metaphor death, but a real death. That way, I wouldn't have the opportunity of doing what I'm doing right now towards being able to bear witness to the truth and tell my viewers just exactly what has went on, what is occurring, and what is now going to occur. They would love to silence me the same way as they silenced others in the past pertaining to Martin Luther King, JFK, and yes, Buford Pulser, and other people that has tried to help them. But because of their defiance, because of them being the way that they was, now they have pride issues. And the Bible says, what cometh before pride? Destruction. You first have pride, and then you have destruction. Pride issues is what will cause Kenton, Tennessee to completely, totally crumble. And I realize right now they're doing very well because of the grain agriculture communities pertaining to them having a bumper year in this particular area. This year. But what about next year? And what about the year after next? And what about the year after that year? Is the granary agriculture community in this area going to be doing so well then, like they are now? You see, only God has control over certain matters and over certain things. Between that and what man is doing to himself and doing to the planet is what would dictate, dominate into what occurs tomorrow, the day after tomorrow, and the day after all the other tomorrows. So even though they may have accomplished towards slowing down the messenger, distributing the message to the people, they haven't stopped it. And the reason why that I say that they haven't stopped it is because I'm still within my right mind. I still have air in my lungs, and I can still independently go and come and tell my story as I'm telling it right now, in little intervals, in little pieces at a time. And eventually there will be somebody out there that will take notice to this, especially as things evolve. And eventually the will of God will still be accomplished, regardless of all the pharaohs. Just like Jesus' teachings taught that all the gates of hell could not nor would not be able to defy the kingdom of God. And just as the primitive teachings, even of today, which are what is to be, will be, and if it's not meant to be, it won't be. Going back into the Acts, the book of Acts out of the King James Version Bible, Acts 23:9, for if this be of God, man nor government cannot overthrow it. For if they attempt to overthrow it, they do great malice. And that's exactly what has happened, not only in Kenton, Tennessee, not only in Hopin, Tennessee, not only in Cydonia, Tennessee, not only in the far regions that go beyond this area, but in this nation of itself. For all the gates of hell could not and would not restrain from the kingdom of the living, holy, righteous God.
And now Vice President Mike Pence is actually expected to lead a delegation to Turkey to attempt to broker that ceasefire. But of course, Becky, as you well know, so much has already changed on the ground. And whatever attempts this administration is now making to try and restore the status quo pre-Turkey's invasion are likely to be futile. We already have Russian troops, Russian control of parts of northern Syria, Syrian government forces.
What did he say? Futile. A matter of fact, I would go so far as to say that it's become so hostile and unstable over there right now by sending ambassadors from the United States over there could be very well jeopardizing their very own lives. Whenever you have this type of hate, whenever you have this type of bitterness that has built up, and you compile that or compound that with a group of people that feels like that they have been stabbed in the back, done wrong, portrayed by the American people, right now would probably not be a good time to be sending top, high-ranking ambassadors to that area. You probably need to conduct yourself either by phone or texting pertaining to whatever that you're going to be trying to say or get across to, because these people are pissed. This whole region has been a tinderbox that has been just waiting to explode. And now, unless it's some sort of magnificent miracle that occurs by the very hand of God, we are going to see this escalate and grow worse and worse and worse, especially whenever you have bigger governments that's now involved, such as Russia and such as other foreign entities that are getting involved in all this. This is part of biblical Bible prophecy, as far as I'm concerned, that is unfolding right in front of our very eyes. Like I said, I don't know if it was done intentionally or non-intentionally, but Mr. Donald Trump, his administration, his presidency, will wear this. This will be something that will be ingrained into their presidency throughout neons to come.
Also there, now allied with the Kurds, who were previously allied with the United States. So the situation on the ground has dramatically changed, as our correspondents on the ground were just saying there, and clearly it will be very difficult for the United States to regain any kind of foothold after this last week. Becky?
Any kind.
Thank you, Jeremy. I want to get back to Arwa because US Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin spoke about these sanctions, these US sanctions against Turkey yesterday. Let's just have a listen to what he said.
Definitely not too late. This is a complicated situation. A NATO ally, Turkey is a full member of NATO and an ally of ours, who is now fighting over border issues with the Kurds, who have helped us with ISIS. It's a complicated situation, and we're monitoring it, as I said, very carefully.
Well, he's choosing his words carefully there, as opposed to perhaps his boss, President Trump. Remember, he talked about killing the Turkish economy only 5 or 6 days ago, should they get out of hand. Well, to most people's minds, the Turks have got out of hand. One could argue that these sanctions have made this more complicated, Arwa.
Well, maybe to a certain degree, Becky, but I also think that Turkey is now in a position where its position is significantly more powerful than that of the United States when it comes to what America is hoping to accomplish with this, ceasefire it's asking for. Look, if a ceasefire is going to be negotiated inside Syria, given who's fighting there right now, it's not the Americans who are going to negotiate it. They are not in touch with the Syrian regime. They have no leverage over Russia. They have no leverage over Iran. They have very little, if any, leverage over Turkey, if as far as they're willing to go is these sanctions that, as I was saying earlier, barely caused the lira to move. Remember, America and Turkey's relationship has been very tenuous over the last years. You have the issue of the S-400s. America was livid over that and basically suspended Turkey from the F-35 program, but didn't make the Turks stop with their purchase. Turkey has, to a certain degree, really begun to turn towards Russia, and Moscow and Ankara are very good at focusing on what goals they can achieve together and then agreeing to disagree when they have their differences. And right now, if a ceasefire is going to be negotiated inside Syria, it's Russia that is going to be doing the negotiation. So unless America is willing to really put a lot more on the table, it doesn't necessarily have the ability to alter the course of what is happening. And when you look at what's going on right now with the way Trump has been tweeting, with the various different conflicting statements that have been coming out from the White House, one can't help but get a sense that every other player in this conflict, Becky, is looking at a very complicated, multi-dimensional game of chess, while America is still trying to figure out how to play Middle East checkers.
There you go.
Spot on.
There you go. She just said exactly what that I was trying to say as far as the lukewarmers. And what does the Bible say about the lukewarmers? What does the first 4 chapters of Revelations, talking to the churches, say about those who are lukewarm? Those who are playing both ends against the middle. It says that God, not Dennis James Juby Jackson, the founder of the Windmill Ministries, but it says that God will spew them out of his mouth because they are nothing more than a bunch of infidels. That is what I've been dealing with for 30 years here in this region, here in America, is a bunch of lukewarmers, a bunch of infidels that didn't want to get holier than thou, but at the same time, they didn't want to breach their identity towards who they really are, so they wanted to play it right there in the middle. Oh, we're just going to dibble-dabble around with just a little bit of sin, and we're not going to become really, really sinful in the eyes of the public, but at the same time, we're not going to become wicked neither. I got news for the American politicians. They have become wicked. This system is polluted and corrupted, and it is rigged to the extent that Donald Trump talked about earlier whenever he was trying to run for president, that the system has become rigged to the degree that the politicians of today that has been in power for the past 20, 25, 30, some of them even longer than 30 years, is corrupt. And now we're seeing the consequences on account of it. And this woman that was just talking about just got through basically saying the exact same thing that I was saying. She just said it in a different, maybe more graceful or graceful way.
I mean, spot on with your analysis, not just on that and the metaphors, but your analysis with regard to Turkey and Russia. To all of you, thank you. Well, the New York Times, quoting a senior US official who claims that Turkey is holding 50 American nuclear weapons hostage, in inverted commas, that's a quote, an airbase near Syria. Cold War era nukes are said to be at the Incirlik air base in southern Turkey as Washington threatens to impose sanctions on Ankara. The officials suggest that President Erdogan will use them as leverage over the US. So, connecting that all up, the Americans are apparently worried that weapons they put in to intimidate Russia may now be used as a bargaining chip by Turkey, who Russia itself now sells advanced weapons to, as Ankara moves into northern Syria.
To intimidate the Americans with. She didn't come right out and just absolutely say it, but the very weaponry that was being used to intimidate the Russians with now can very well be used to intimidate the Americans with. The tables has turned. And because the tables has turned, now, what does it say right there? What does it say on the bottom line? What is this word right here? It's a word that I've been trying to drive off into my viewers' minds for quite some times now. Nukes hostage. Holding United States nukes hostage. Turkey of holding United States nukes hostage. That's just about as serious, folks, as you can get. This is more serious than the JFK Cuba standoff. This exceeds anything that JFK and his administration was staring down the barrels of. Right now, this is where we are. I don't want to frighten people. I don't want to draw this into something that it's not. But I want to be honest with my viewers, and I want to be honest with what we're looking at here pertaining to reality. I seen a plane yesterday whenever I was down in Trenton, Tennessee, and over towards Brazil and Frog Jump and down into that area over into Crockett County that I took a bunch of pictures of yesterday. Had a bunch of antique old stuff. Time basically rolled back, in which maybe I'll be able to issue those out to my general viewers before long. But I seen a plane yesterday fly over the American government. I don't know if it was an AWACS. I don't know what kind of plane that it was, but it was bigger and wider than just about any other plane that I have seen fly over the United States, give or take about a mile high, maybe a little more, that was putting out a streamer pertaining to a chemtrail that looked to be about 3 times or 4 times the size of a football field. I don't know who it was. I don't know where their destination was going. I just know that you don't see these type of planes ordinarily flying over America that high and that big. So whatever is going on in the international global society department, it must be pretty big if you're seeing AWACS and other types of destroyers flying over America that's involved in these type of decisions. If there's ever been a time that we needed to pray, I can't emphasize enough for our leaders, for what is going on in high-ranking departments, as well as ourselves. It is today. It is today.
Well, the Turkish invasion is resounding around the world, including, of course, on the football pitch. German club FC St. Pauli has raised
As I travel through this pilgrim land, there is a friend
this
who
hour.
walks with me. As I kneel in prayer, I hope to meet you there, precious Jesus, hold my hand. As I kneel in prayer, I hope to meet you there, precious Jesus, hold my hand.
Do not understand. Welcome back. You're watching Connect the World with me, Becky Anderson. It's just after 6:30 here in the UAE, and if you're just joining us, you are more than welcome. This hour, we're taking a close look at what has become a very uncertain period in the presidency of Donald Trump. He has spent the last few weeks venting his anger over the Democrats' impeachment probe, singling out the lawmakers leading the inquiry. Add to that what could best be described as political whiplash over his decision to withdraw US troops from northern Syria. And that led, of course, to a very quick Turkish invasion with US allied Kurds targeted in bipartisan anger at home. It's also given a big diplomatic opening to Russia's president. And Vladimir Putin is spending part of this week courting American allies here in the Middle East. Today, the Russian president in Abu Dhabi on a state visit following a stop in Saudi Arabia yesterday. He's been more than a decade since President Putin has been on state visits to either of these places. Well, much has changed in Abu Dhabi since his last visit here in 2007. A Louvre, theme parks, luxury hotels and airport terminals, and shimmering all of it in an ever-expanding global city. But more significantly, the Gulf Kingdom's relationship with Russia, whose regional clout only continues to grow as the US seemingly leaves the door wide open for a new superpower in the Middle East. And that brings me to my next report. Touching down to a fanfare in the United Arab Emirates after a 21-gun salute in Saudi Arabia on Monday. President Putin's second official visit to Abu Dhabi, underlining Moscow's growing economic and strategic interest in the region.
We see the United Arab Emirates as one of our very close and promising partners. I have to say that, as is the case with Saudi Arabia, our partnership is vigorously developing in all areas.
That partnership, sealed with a visit to Moscow by Abu Dhabi's Crown Prince Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed last year, only continues to grow, with Abu Dhabi's sovereign wealth fund, Mubadala, committing investments of around $6 billion in Russia in renewables, infrastructure, ports and airports. And with the recent launch of the first ever Emirati astronaut to the International Space Station aboard a Russian Soyuz rocket, clear signs of a promising partnership where the sky, it seems, really is the limit. But experts here say beyond a burgeoning trading partner, it's Russia's increasing strategic influence that counts. And nowhere might that be more important than Moscow's relationship with Iran. In a Gulf region simmering on the brink of conflict, the potential for Mr. Putin to play peacemaker is a compelling one. The founder of the regional think tank, the Beirut Institute, Brigida Dergam, writing recently in the national newspaper, what we may be witnessing as a result of the initiatives taken by Mr. Macron and Mr. Putin is a period of relative calm in the region, at least for the time being.
For us, of course, the main thing is now to prevent a kind of military clash between Iran, Saudi Arabia, United States, because it will not be limited to a regional conflict. It will immediately involve Russia, US, and many other countries.
President Putin's trip to the Gulf comes against the backdrop of a new chapter in Syria's more than 8-year war, where Russian-backed Assad forces are now swarming the US-backed Kurdish-controlled north border after Russia brokered a deal between the two foes as Turkey advances its offensive into Syria. This major shift in alliances coming as President Trump leaves the door of diplomatic responsibility wide open as he withdraws US troops from northern Syria.
We're doing jobs, frankly, that Europe should be doing. We're doing jobs that Russia should be doing, that Iran should be doing, that Iraq, Turkey, Syria should be doing. They should be doing this. We shouldn't be doing it. We're 7,000 miles away.
How ironic, then, if Donald Trump's Syrian cop-out, a reality check about the limits of American power in the Middle East region, provides a vacuum for Moscow's growing clout, with Russia rising as the new queen on the Middle East's fractured chessboard. Well, there when President Putin arrived in Abu Dhabi was CNN's senior international correspondent Sam Kiley, who joins me now. And you and I remarking that this, of course, in President Trump, is the second unreliable US president for this region. And perhaps, therefore, no one should be surprised that it's a region that is concerned about its alliances with America. The conceit of that piece, of course, is President Putin and Moscow, or are President Putin and Moscow in a position to fill a vacuum here?
Well, yeah, I mean, if you look back to the Obama administration, the Obama administration's failure to deal with the crossed red line of the use of chemical weapons, threat of bombing or whatever he was going to do, and then didn't follow it up, led originally then to the Russians to feel much more confident about intervening militarily on the side of Bashar al-Assad.
Then you had Trump signaling so frequently that he wanted out of all of these conflicts across the Middle East, nearly doing so several months ago, rattling the Europeans. I remember talking to British officials, angry beyond words, beyond printable words anyway, at having to have their spies shred equipment and destroy equipment on the ground. Last time there was an announcement of withdrawal from Syria. Then this precipitous moment. All of this has been signaled, all of it plays into the hands of Vladimir Putin. He's simply stepping into that space.
Sam Kiley's with us and will be, of course, throughout the week. Sam, thanks for joining us. You will want to stay with us for the next hour of Connect the World. I'll be talking with the US Democratic Congressman Anthony Brown, who had a tour of duty with the US Army in Iraq. He's vice chair of the House Armed Services Committee, and he has some very critical things to say about President Trump's decision to withdraw troops from Syria. Well, ahead on the programme, LeBron James weighs in on the feud between the NBA and China. What he says.
We're just about to wrap this up. We want to catch this one last headline here.
China, in which the Houston Rockets...
I ain't worried about that. That's trivial stuff to me.
After England players were the target of race.
I know it ain't trivial to some people, but to me it's trivial. This is all sickening towards what has happened here and what is being developed.
I've been waiting for LeBron to weigh in on this controversy, and LeBron says, well, he believes manager Daryl Morey was misinformed.
Well, they're turning this into a big speech. It's pertaining to open democracy, freedom of speech. Lots of stuff. Lots of stuff. Just got through getting hit by a major typhoon over there. Devastated them. That we call hurricanes, they call typhoons.
It was going to blow everybody up.
At what point might we see Rudy Giuliani arrested?
This was another day in Adam Schiff's kangaroo court. The Democrats should provide Republicans and the president exactly what they would insist if the roles were reversed.
12 candidates will be on the stage of CNN New York Times Democratic debate.
Biden seems to have sort of plateaued.
Elizabeth Warren steps on the stage, perhaps as the front runner in the race.
Live from CNN Abu Dhabi.
Round two as Democratic lawmakers work their way into the decision going in the totally opposite direction. The latest on Syria. And a football match between Saudi Arabia and the Palestinians, a geopolitical spectre. Why is that? More on that ahead. But right now on Capitol Hill, lawmakers running the impeachment inquiry into President Trump are hearing new closed-door testimony. Today, they are questioning George Kent, a career diplomat with the US State Department with years of experience working with and in Ukraine. Democrats trying to get to the bottom of the Trump administration's dealings with the country. CNN has learned the last witness in the inquiry on Monday called those dealings corrupt. A source tells us former Trump advisor Fiona Hill painted a picture of a dangerous rogue operation in the White House, cutting the State Department out of the loop on foreign policy, which she says Russia could easily exploit. Meanwhile, it's a big day for the candidates who want voters to push Donald Trump out of the White House. 12 Democrats will take the stage just hours from now in a jumbo-sized debate. Joining me, Lauren Fox, following the action on Capitol Hill, Jeff Zeleny is in Ohio for that debate, and standing by with analysis, Harry Enten at CNN's New York headquarters. Let's get started, folks, and with you, Lauren, some explosive testimony on the Hill from one Fiona Hill, sounding the alarm about Donald Trump's personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, setting up what is likely to be a slew of new information in this impeachment inquiry this week, correct?
Well, that's right, Becky, and I will tell you that Fiona Hill was behind closed doors with lawmakers for more than 10 hours yesterday, and one of the biggest giveaways and takeaways from that testimony was the fact that she raised concerns about Rudy Giuliani's shadow foreign policy abroad, and that she raised those concerns to her superiors. I will also tell you that one of the other big moments during that testimony yesterday was the fact that she told lawmakers that she had concerns when Marie Yovanovitch, the former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, was reassigned from her post in that country back to the United States. That was just a few of the things that we heard from lawmakers coming out. Jamie Raskin, a Democrat on the Oversight Committee, had this to say about Rudy Giuliani's role abroad.
Rudy Giuliani has clearly been a leading force for the administration in defining a shadow foreign policy in Ukraine. There was an official foreign policy which was attempting to counter corruption in Ukraine, and then there was Rudy Giuliani and the gang that couldn't shoot straight, who worked for him, who were involved precisely in connecting with corruption in Ukraine and promoting corruption in Ukraine. So you had two foreign policies that were working completely against each other.
And Deputy Assistant Secretary George Kent is behind closed doors with lawmakers right now as we speak. It's going to be another busy week on Capitol Hill with deadlines today for the Vice President to turn over documents, as well as the Secretary of Defense and the OMB Director. Becky?
Importantly, of course, George Kent subpoenaed to appear in front of these committees. Thank you for that. This comes, of course, Harry, as new polls show Americans are pretty much split on impeachment. What are these new polls telling us? Break it all down for us, if you will.
Yeah, I think it's very important to separate out the impeach and remove versus the impeachment inquiry. On the impeachment inquiry, it seems to me that Americans overall are, in fact, in favor of that, of the impeachment inquiry. We had a new Quinnipiac University poll that came out yesterday that showed the majority of Americans support the impeachment inquiry, 51%. That's largely in line with what the other polling has tended to suggest. That is, the majority of Americans support the impeachment inquiry. On impeach and remove itself, if you were to look at that Quinnipiac University poll, in fact, it's basically about even, and that looks like the polling as well. So Americans seem ready to say, yes, we approve of this impeachment inquiry, but impeaching and removing Trump, let's wait a little bit on that. Let's see what evidence actually comes out during the inquiry.
It's fascinating times, isn't it? Should we expect? I mean, we've been seeing some...
No, it's not fascinating times. It's sad times.
Sort of...
Still haven't gotten to where I want to be in regard to that other person that was going to be talking. I don't see it yet.
Anthony Brown joining me live.
Commercial.
The calls growing louder for Turkey to end its military operation in Syria. Just a short time ago, Britain's Prime Minister and the NATO Secretary General both urged Turkey to stand down and instead focus its efforts on defeating ISIS. Boris Johnson and Jens Stoltenberg issuing a statement after a meeting in London. Their concern comes as we get fresh casualty numbers from both sides, nearly a week after Turkey began its military offensive against Kurds in northern Syria. Well, Kurdish forces report at least 75 civilians killed and 450 wounded. And Turkey says one of its soldiers has been killed and 8 others injured in an attack near the former ISIS stronghold of Manbij. Well, our Damon along the Turkish-Syrian border, Nick Payton-Walsh in the Iraqi city of Erbil on the other side of the border from Syria. Oh, let me start with you. These calls now coming thick and fast for Turkey to end this offensive. Is Ankara listening?
At this stage, no, it doesn't seem like it. Or at the very least, Becky, Ankara is not listening to Washington. It's not listening to the White House, and it's not listening to any of the calls that are coming from Europe, because from Ankara's perspective, the West has failed in understanding exactly why it is that Turkey is so upset with the fact that the U.S. chose the Syrian Kurdish fighting force known as the YPG as an ally on the ground in northern Syria in the fight against ISIS. Because as we have been reporting, Turkey views the YPG as being one and the same as the Kurdish separatist group, the PKK, that the Turkish government has been battling for decades. So at this stage, that Turkey has, and the president has been very clear about this, lost patience with his so-called Western allies. You'll remember a few days ago, President Erdogan even told European nations that if they dared to criticize this operation, he would open the gates for the refugees to begin flooding back to Europe's shores once again. So at this stage in all of this, and it is a very fast-moving situation though, but the one player, the one nation that can actually mediate something between the various parties on the ground, that can actually perhaps even push this notion of a ceasefire forward, is not Europe, it's not America, it's Russia.
Nick, meantime on the ground, thank you. The Kurdish administration says around 275,000 people have been displaced from the area that you have spent much of the past 72 hours in since this fighting ratcheted up less than a week ago. Who are these people and where are they going?
I have to tell you, when we were there, we did not see vast convoys of people on the move, not like we've seen in the past in displacement in that area. That may be because it had already happened to some degree by the time we got there, but even as land was changing fast very, very quickly indeed, this was not roads jammed by people trying to necessarily get out. These are people who presumably have fears of the regime coming in, or who have fears of the Turkish-backed Syrian rebels coming in. Those Syrian rebels, one US official described to me as being mostly extremists, former ISIS, former Al-Qaeda, and then of course there are many in the Syrian Kurds who are close to the Americans who would fear the regime potentially coming in. These are the changing dynamics at play. But to go back to the point about what's happening today, as far as we are beginning to see, we're hearing from an eyewitness now that suggests the Turkish-backed forces have got down the main highway, the kind of road that was cut back on Sunday that seems to have led to the Americans deciding it was time to get out. It seems that the Turkish have advanced about 20 kilometers away down that road from Tal Tamr, which is the town now taken by the Syrian regime that's south of Ras Al Ain, which is now held by pro-Turkish forces. It appears they've got to there, suggesting maybe that that main highway is sort of the outer border, really, of how far Turkey intends to go. It would make logical sense if that was where they began to draw lines. It doesn't seem that Erdogan has desires to push over that highway and head further south. And we are also hearing, of course, that outside of Manbij, which is where the Americans had a base, always a contested town, certainly, the Americans are no longer there, and that there are Russian and Syrian regime forces moving towards it, if not already in it, and Russian military police providing the buffer, the kind of patrolling, if you like, of the sort of demarcation zone between pro-Turkish forces to its north and those actually inside of it. So it does look like after this fast-moving pace of events, over, frankly, a lot of the time, very sparsely populated areas, we might be beginning to see things congeal into a current situation that might last a bit longer. But where into this does all the United States influence fit? The answer is nothing. They're sending Vice President Mike Pence, not frankly a career international diplomat of vast caliber. They're sending him to Ankara to try and talk to Turkey, who they've just released fairly toothless sanctions against, but have been pretty critical of, and who frankly in their hearts know Donald Trump authorized this at the start to mediate between Turkey and the Syrian Kurds who many think, frankly, have just been betrayed by the United States in ways we've probably not seen since the Vietnam War. So utterly startling that the US has put itself in this political position, and on the ground, it doesn't seem to matter what they say. Their troops are leaving in very precarious circumstances. The announcement that they're going happening before they get a chance to pack. Startling military procedure, and so the ground has changed in a matter of days. We wound ourselves back from last Sunday, where it was quite clear the US and Turkey felt they had a mechanism that could try and slow things down on that border and calm matters, and then one phone call, and here we are now. America's out, and Russia and Turkey are calling the shots.
Yeah, it's absolutely remarkable. As you rightly point out, the speed of this has been something that has really shocked everybody in the region. Oh, this entire crisis in Syria does bring into question Turkey's true position on their alliance with America and more broadly with NATO. US Defense Secretary Mark Esper recently spoke to this concern. Have a listen.
Do they seem like much of an ally now, Turkey?
No, I think Turkey, the arc of their behavior over the past several years has been terrible. I mean, they are spinning out of the Western orbit, if you will. We see them purchasing Russian arms, cuddling up to President Putin.
You've provided our expert analysis on what is this sort of non-linear relationship that Turkey has with Russia. The dynamics of that relationship, as you've explained, are really quite malleable, let me put it that way. I mean, they slip around to a certain extent. According to whether Ankara and or Moscow believes that it's in their interest. I wonder what you believe is the long game for Turkey with everyone else, including NATO.
Look, there's one thing that Turkey doesn't make any secret of, and that is that it, like other countries, will put its own national security first. And from Turkey's perspective, with the YPG posing this existential threat, they believe that it is well within their rights to put their national security first. This whole operation for them allows them to achieve that. And then, of course, in theory, Turkey wanted to move upwards of 2 million refugees who live in Turkey into this safe zone. But that in and of itself creates a whole lot of issues because those refugees aren't from there, and also because it would potentially significantly change the demographic along the border. But that aside, Turkey feels that the West is the one who actually turned away from it first by being so ununderstanding when it came to why Turkey was so upset about the allegiance with the YPG inside Syria. And Turkey has felt and had felt in the past when major population centers were getting pounded both by the PKK and by ISIS that the West hasn't really stood with it. Turkey is to a certain degree quite pragmatic when it comes to how it is dealing with various nations. It has said that it is well within its rights, again, to protect its own national security. But also when it comes to its relationship with Russia, it's quite fascinating to a certain degree how those two countries are able to compartmentalize their relationship. Look, they're on different sides of the conflict when it comes to what's happening inside Idlib, and yet they still, throughout all of that, manage to maintain very significant and robust economic ties. And then you look at what's happening right now inside Syria. The Russians have relationships with the Kurds and are talking to them. They are obviously the biggest backer of Bashar al-Assad, and they have a relationship with Turkey. Russia is going to be the country that most likely ends up resolving, negotiating some sort of a ceasefire and then parceling up the territory inside northern Syria at this stage. America has completely sidelined itself, and it does seem, as I was saying last hour, that the other key players are looking at a multi-dimensional chessboard, and America is still thinking that this is some sort of game of checkers.
Yeah. Fascinating. To both of you on the ground, thank you. And ahead. Well, it's a double dose of controversy for Donald Trump. The US president also dealing, of course, with the ongoing impeachment inquiry in Washington, now with the global fallout from his decision to withdraw troops from Syria. We're going to talk about both with US Democratic Congressman Anthony Brown, who has a unique perspective on this, up next. Plus, a landmark football match played in the West Bank. We'll tell you why the staging of a Saudi-Palestinian match is a lot more important than the actual score.
It looks like we're here at the end now towards covering this, I don't know if you'd call it a war correspondence, courts pertaining to what's going on globally in regard to all the events that's happening over in the Middle East and throughout the world. But the fact of the matter is, we are here where we're at today in a very, very unpleasant stance in the eyes of the world, that I have to be honest and frank with my viewers in saying that this is the consequences towards what should have went on that didn't go on during the Reagan administration. Thank you for your time. Good luck to all of us. And once more, Shalom, coming from the Windmill Ministries missions at 291 Thompson Road, Sharon, Tennessee, zip code 38255. Thank you, and we appreciate your prayers and any other contributing events that you feel free to make a contribution on. We thank you in those regards. Thank you, and God bless. Shalom.